Good afternoon, everybody. Nikki here. I am doing my presentation over a family's education. So over the past 8 weeks, I have accumulated this research diving into family dynamics, specifically how a mother and father's education level will dictate a child's education level, the highest degree they obtain. This was a subject near and dear to my heart. As many of us are parents, I think the same thought goes through our heads. How can we support our children to go further? And in my specific circumstance, I'm actually going to be the very first person in my family to graduate college. So that was a very meaningful starting point for me. I wanted to see what legacy does this mean for my children. And what I came to find was actually kind of interesting. It was not what I initially thought. My hypothesis really was that a child will not be able to outperform the parent's educational level. By that I mean a child will not receive a higher degree than that of their parents. And I came into this with the expectation that socioeconomic restraints such as poverty level and racial barriers that impacted parents would in turn impact their children and affect their ability to receive a higher education. I am not negating that is a aspect, but as we will dive in and look at the data, there was actually some unique things that told a different story. I utilized the General Social Survey for the 2012 survey as my survey instrument, as most of us did. And the specific variables I looked at were: what was the mother's highest year of school completed? What was the father's highest year of school completed? And lastly, what was the respondent's highest year of school completed? Through these variables, I was able to compare the data across several different statistical tests that brought up a few interesting features. So let's look at this up close. So right here, I have a couple frequency tables: one for the mother's data, the father's, and the respondents. So initially, I didn't really take much value into what I was looking at. But the second go around, I noticed something interesting. So while 9.6% of the mothers received their bachelor's degrees and 9.1% of the fathers received their bachelor's degrees, 17.9% of respondents received theirs. Okay? And looking at this from an even cooler perspective, we had these rates of parents that were not receiving their high school diploma: 28.5 for mothers, 26.9 for fathers, but only 14.6 respondents were unable to complete high school. So just that significant change between the parents and the children was really actually eye-opening and reassuring. So there's a few things that I want to look at when I'm considering this data. There's a few, simple things that we can consider. One, that parents want more for their children than what they had for themselves. And this is, a better education comes part of that. What parent doesn't want a better life for their kid than what they had? So that may mean they're more likely to encourage their children to stay in school. According to the article that I read by Harris and Robinson, they actually touched on this subject with a new framework for understanding parental involvement. They studied the cross tabulations that kind of illustrated what I'm getting at here. Basically, what mattered more was not how many PTA meetings parents pursued, how many extracurricular activities their kids were in, but a child's educational success actually came down to the parents' ability to set an adequate stage for them to pursue their education. What this meant was instilling the value of an education in their kiddos, motivating them to be self-motivated to pursue their school, and just giving them a space to pursue class as well, to pursue their education. So that was what I thought was pretty cool. A few other things I used, touching on the subject of parents who struggle with academic success being more likely to encourage their children to exceed the limitations of their parents' educational level. By that meaning, I used a few chi-square tests, which actually, as you can see, demonstrate that there was a strong correlation between the mother's and father's education levels when looked at the respondents' educational level. And to further drive this point home, I also have a few pie charts that will illustrate the same conclusion. Although we aren't looking at a very large margin here, we still see that there is a connection between it all. Basically, the respondents are achieving higher degree levels than their parents. Like I touched on earlier, though, the most encouraging part about this was the amount of children completing high school when their parents had not previously. So what we ended up coming to find here was not what I thought was going to be the case. In fact, children are statistically achieving greater degrees than that of their parents. So that even though that is not really drastic, it still drives home this point. And we can look at this from a few perspectives as to why this data is the way it is. Generational differences can be, a component of this. Previous generations, there might not have been an expectation to pursue education as much as it is now. You can't really get by in today's world without at very least a high school diploma. Most jobs, even flipping burgers, won't allow it. So that puts more emphasis on completing high school for more recent generations. But I also think there is, that element of parents wanting more for their children. At least that's one of the things I take home from looking at this. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and helping me along in this process.